everyone, welcome back to Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Today I'm going to be talking about the Goodreads Choice Awards for 2023 and whether I want to read any of the books. Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new. My name's Alice and I have way too many books, and because of those way too many books I don't often, I would say, read new releases. And the Goodreads Choice Awards is a Reader's Choice Awards that comes around this time every year, where we, the readers on Goodreads, can vote for our favourites of the year. Now, 20 books are selected across a variety of different categories, and the long lists for this were announced last week, so I'm a little bit behind. But my first thoughts on looking at the Goodreads list this year was that I was a little bit disappointed that I hadn't read more, mainly because I had read quite a few books for the Booktube prize this year, and I read the entirety of the Women's Prize long list, so I thought that I had read probably more new releases this year than last year. I then thought, well, I have been known to be wrong. Let me have a look back at the video I made this time last year about the Goodreads Choice Awards and whether I wanted to read any of those books. And it did make me laugh because last year I had read one book on all of the Goodreads long lists, and that was in the graphic novels category, which sadly disappeared this year. No graphic novels category, no poetry category, and no children's pitch books or middle grade categories. So that's a shame. Not really going to go into that today, just to say that I am a bit disappointed that some good categories of books have been axed. Yes, now last year I had a look at how many books had I actually read that year that had been published that year, and the answer was 9 books. And of those 9 books, one of them had been selected in one of the categories. As I've mentioned, that was Heartstopper in the graphic novels category, which I think it did go on to win. This year, in 2023, I've read 15 books that were published this year, as far as I know. So you would think that there would be a good selection of those that possibly might be on the list. But no, I have done slightly better than last year and read 4 books across all categories. It just goes to show really that I am reading quite a lot of backlist books, and where I am reading newer books, I'm often reading books from like the year before. So yeah, that was my first observation. So the 4 I have read this year are not really in categories that I would consider myself a huge reader of. They are Stone Blind by Natalie Haynes, which features in the fantasy category, How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, which appears in the horror category. I have read 1 book from the debut category, which is The Bandit Queens by Perini Schroff, and I've read 1 book in the humour category, which is Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. So those are the 4 that I have read at this point, and Strong Female Character I literally finished reading yesterday, so yeah, not that many. But today I wanted to sort of do what I did last year, which is to look at, are there some books on the Goodreads Reader's Choice Awards that I would like to read in any of the categories. That's what I did last year, was to create a wish list. I thought I would also look back on last year on the wish list that I made of 12 books that I really wanted to read from the categories last year, and did I read them? And if so, did I like them? So let's begin there. If you would like to skip to this year's books and find out which ones I'm sort of adding to my mental wish list, putting on my radar and so on, then I will leave the timestamp in the description down below. If you'd like to hear about what I thought last year compared to whether I actually read that wish list, then that's coming now. First of all, in fiction, last year I selected 4 books from that category that I wanted to read. And I have read 4 books that appeared in that category, but one of them is not a book that I'd selected, and there is one that I haven't yet read. So the one that I haven't yet read was True Biz by Sarah Novak, and I do still want to read this. It hasn't been a priority as yet, but it's still a book that is definitely on my radar. The book that I read that was on the list, that I only realised was on the list when I revisited this, was Now Is Not the Time to Panic by Kevin Wilson. I read this for the Booktube prize and I really enjoyed it. It's a fun coming of age novel. Now, of the 3 books that I read that I said I was going to read, 2 of them have been 5-star reads for me, and one of them a strong 4-star read. The strong 4-star read was Nightcrawling by Layla Motley, and the reason why this wasn't a 5-star read for me was I did find this to be very, very dark and very, very bleak. It's a good book, but it just wasn't 100% my cup of tea, because I just didn't feel that there was much hope to it. 2 of my absolute favourite reads of the year are the other 2 books that I picked out, and it was quite funny to listen to myself talking about this book, Demon Copperhead, before I had read it, saying that it was likely not even a book that I might get to that year, but I did vaguely want to read it. Looking back on that now, it was quite funny because I have been pretty obsessed with this being my best book all year. Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. It went on to win a multitude of prizes, although not this one. I read it when I was reading the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. The other one was Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I believe this did actually win the Goodreads Choice Awards fiction category. It remains a favourite for the year, definitely a 5-star read for me, and I read this for the first round of the Booktube prize. So yeah, 2 favourites from that fiction category. In the mystery and thriller category, I haven't done quite as well. I picked 2 books I definitely wanted to read. One was The Bullet That Missed by Richard Osman. I believe that's the 3rd book in the series, and I've actually only read the 1st book still, so I've made no progress towards getting onto that book, and I'm finding that my interest in that series has probably waned a little bit. I still would read it, it's just not a high priority. And I did read the other one I picked out, which was Daisy Darker by Alice Feeney. Enjoyed that. I think I gave it 4 stars. Paid a lot of homage to Agatha Christie, and particularly the book And Then There Were None. Obviously it wasn't a patch on that, but I did enjoy the callbacks to Christie, and I did enjoy what had been done in this book. In historical fiction, I picked out 2 books that I definitely wanted to read. I've read one of them, and I've also read 4 other books that were in that category. All of them when I was reading books for other prizes. So I read Carrie Soto Is Back, Trust, and Young Mungo, all for the Booktube prize, and I read Memphis for the Women's Prize. Those were not on my radar at the time of making that video. The only one that I read for another prize was The Marriage Portrait by Maggie O'Farrell. Great book, a strong 4 stars for me, maybe even 4.5 stars. That was a great book that I read during the Women's Prize season as well. I have not yet got to Shrines of Gaiety by Kate Atkinson. Again, maybe my interest has waned a little bit, but I do still always love a Kate Atkinson book, so I won't rule out still reading that at some point. Disappointingly, the one book that was actually on my giant TBR when I made that video last year is still on my giant TBR, even though I have a lovely copy of it, and that's Sea of Tranquility by Emily St John Mandel. I feel quite bad for not prioritising the one I actually had on my shelf, but I still have high hopes for that. I also did read How High We Go in the Dark from that category, which I would highly rate. I really, really enjoyed, definitely a strong 4 star. And I sort of had a vague preference to eventually read Blake Crouch's Upgrade, but I haven't got to that yet. I did say it was low priority. And the last book that I said I was going to read in that video was Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. I did read that. I thought it was excellent. I probably gave that a 4 to 4.5 star rating. So, from last year's prize, I actually really enjoyed everything that I picked out. Nothing lower than a 4-star so far. So when I say I don't really get on with books from the Goodreads Choice Awards, that isn't actually true, because when I pick out my own ones from their lists, I do really enjoy them. Getting on to this year, can I pick myself a winning list again? I am a little bit doubtful this year because I'm not as interested in the prize as I was last year, but I do love a book list. I've picked out a couple from a few of the categories. I haven't got something from every category, just the same as last year. I'm going to not talk about the best debut category because that tends to be the category that I read the most books from, but it also always overlaps into the other categories. So everything I've picked out from best debut, apart from The Bandit Queens, which I've already read, falls into another category, I believe. Let's start with fiction. I'm actually really quite uninterested in most of the fiction picks this year. There's nothing in fiction that I had already read. The 3 that I am mildly interested in are Yellowface by Rebecca F. Kwong. The only reason I'm particularly interested in getting to this book is the hype. It's one of those books where I'm curious to see what I actually think of it, because lots of people have loved it. I've actually heard quite a few negative opinions recently as well, so I would like to find out what I think about it for myself. It's not a super high priority. The second one on my list from fiction is Tom Lake by Anne Patchett. This is because I haven't yet read any Anne Patchett books, and my mum has recommended them to me many times and told me that Anne Patchett is a good author. Also, my mum recently read this and said it's a really good book. I know very little else about it. And the third one is Marmite by Jessica George. This wasn't a book I was initially interested in when it came out, but when I went to the Women's Prize Live in the summer, I went to a really cool event that was debut authors talking, and there were 3 debut authors, 2 of whom have not actually had their book come out yet, but they will be out next year. And one was Jessica George, the author of Marmite. And the way she spoke about the book and her experiences as a writer and her experiences in publishing was just really interesting, very down to earth. And I thought, from what she said about Marmite and the fact that it was very much drawn from personal experience, I felt like it was really a book that I would like to read. So that is on my radar as well. In the mystery and thriller, disappointingly, I've read nothing, but that's not really new. I quite often haven't read anything in the sort of popular mystery and thriller. I think I'm very much like a backlist reader of mysteries and thrillers. There's only 2 in this category that remotely interest me. One is After That Night by Karen Slaughter, and this is Will Trent book 11, so a book in Karen Slaughter's ongoing series. Karen Slaughter's Will Trent series isn't my favourite of her series, and I have very much enjoyed some of her standalones more than her Will Trent series as well. But I will eventually read this. However, this is book 11 and I'm up to number 6, so not yet for that one. The only other book that has come up for me during the course of the year in mystery and thriller is I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Mackay. This is one I was interested in and had on my radar, thinking it might appear on the Women's Prize for Fiction, but it didn't. And since then I've heard fairly lukewarm reviews and some negative reviews. I feel quite mixed about it. Again, it's one that if I was to get hold of a copy, I would be interested to read. In fantasy, I had read one book, which was Stoneblind. I haven't picked out any books that I do want to read from this category. So moving on to sci-fi, I have 2 books that I definitely want to read. And one of those, once again, like last year, is the one and only book from the whole of the lists that I have on the giant TBR. And this year, that's another lovely sprayed edge book. Are we noticing a theme here? That is in the sci-fi category and I haven't read yet. and this time it's The Ferryman by Justin Cronin. This is probably the book in the entire prize that I am most interested in reading, hence why it's on my shelf, and I very much look forward to trying more Justin Cronin. I loved his book The Passage. I never went on to read the rest of the trilogy. I think it's kind of set in a utopia rather than a dystopia, but like one that maybe isn't all what it seems, so very, very much looking forward to that one. The other one I'm very much looking forward to, due to people on Booktube raving about it, is Chain Gang All Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. This has been one of Gem of Books' favourite books of the year, and I am highly influenced to have FOMO by Gem of Books. I also watched Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. Both said that it was like one of the best dystopian fiction that they have read, so of course I want to read that, and that is on its way as a reserve from the library. Sci-fi is the most promising category for me this year, I would say, and I just wanted to give an honorary mention to a book I picked out that I don't know if it's for me, but definitely has the best title in this whole competition, and that's I Keep My Exoskeletons to Myself. This is a debut novel by Marissa Crane. What a cracking title. In the horror category, I've read one book, How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, and I would like to read Holly by Stephen King at some point, because the Holly of the title is a quite important side character in The Outsider, which I read earlier in the year, and I really, really enjoyed that book, but I particularly enjoyed her character, so I can see why Stephen King has gone on to write her into a book of her own. So I will get to that at some point, probably not while it's in hardback unless I came across it at the library. So that's all I've selected this year that are on my wish list to read from the Goodreads Awards. Yeah, let me know in the comments, what are you thinking about the Goodreads prize this year? Have you read any of the books? Are you going to read any of the books? Let me know all of that in the comments down below. I think probably my favourite book that I've read so far from this year's selection is actually Strong Female Character by Fern Brady, which I finished this week. That's non-fiction and I would recommend it. Thanks for watching today. If you have enjoyed this very uninformed look at the prize, please do give it a like. Please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I will hope to see you all again very soon for another video all about books here on Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. Bye for now.